So, I watched Adolescence, right? And a few people have asked, a few women actually have contacted me and asking if I or someone else had talked about it, and I hadn't got around to it, been away, and I got back. And it's a beautiful series, right? This is just my thoughts. It's a beautiful series, really well shot, yeah? Even the first episode, it's a kind of continual hour, right, that just follows. I think it's really beautifully shot in that way, wonderfully produced. Like, you know, the acting, the scripting is really good. One of the things I find really interesting about the series is the fathers in it, right? And the lack of closeness that those fathers have with their children. You know, we see it with the DI, the Ashley Waters character, right? Him and his son are clearly, there's a lack of connection, right, between them. There's a lack of relationship between them, right? It's a really obvious piece you see. You know, even when there's moments when the son is trying to explain to him about the emojis and their meaning, he's almost scared, right? He's angry at his father. You can see there's an anger, there's a resentment, there's, you know, this feeling that he's not going to be believed, he's not important, right? And I think that's a really important thing, right? The son of the DDI, he's like, I'm not important in comparison to your work. And I think this is an important thing because so many men are working seriously hard for their families, and they have to, and the impact of on their children of that, right? And there's a very clear understanding that it doesn't come across, but I really felt it, that like his son is being bullied quite seriously, partly because of the fact that he is the son of a policeman, but also you can see that he may not be the most sociable child there. He may not be getting along with people very well, and that actually school is quite difficult for him, right? And it appears that Ashley Waters has no idea about this really, right? Or is only vaguely interested. And I think this is something about fathers. And I think this series, Adolescence, to me is more about fatherhood than anything else, right? And the impact of fatherhood. I think it's super interesting as well as you listen to like the teachers and the policemen. I just have no idea about the incel stuff and all the meaning and so forth, right? I think that's a really important aspect of what's happening as well. I think that the father, what's his name? I can't remember his name. The father of the young boy, Jamie, I think he's also, I think, if not the main character, is that his anger is the main character, right? And how that anger is passed on to Jamie, right? And I think this is a very, very important aspect, right? Because there's a lot of men that I speak to, a lot of men out there who are like, my father beat me black and blue, and I don't want to do that to my kids, right? Which is a really noble thing to do, right? To be better than our fathers. And then they don't do it. They don't beat their kids, right? They don't hit them. They don't beat them with belts, like all those things that many of us experience as kids. But what they don't do is they don't deal with their anger, right? They don't deal with the anger, or they have shame about the anger because the anger reminds them of their fathers, right? And I think his anger, right, which again, there's nothing wrong with anger per se, right? There's nothing wrong with anger itself. It's how we express it, and if it leaks over into uncontrollable rage. It's his anger that's obviously manifested itself in Jamie, but no one's really done anything about that anger in Jamie, right? No one's taught him how to regulate his emotions. No one's taught him how to express himself in anger without being destructive. Like, his parents kind of admit this towards the end of the series. They could have done more, right? Which again, always, every parent probably feels they could have done more. I'm a new parent and I definitely feel I could have done more already. But I think it's really important that this emotionality, right, this emotional expression and these pieces, that these are things that we teach young people, right? And we teach men, because, you know, Jamie's father could do with some help around his anger, right? And you can see that it spills over literally when he's throwing paint at his van, right? He's lost his shit, right? He's throwing paint at his van, and his wife and his daughter are terrified of him as well. And they don't feel they can kind of confront him about his anger, and they have to kind of tiptoe around him in that way. And I think this is very synonymous for men and relationships, where the women they're in a relationship with feel they have to tiptoe around their anger, their insecurities, their anger, insecurities, deficiencies, their masculinity, the things around their masculinity. They can't confront them, they can't talk to them, they can't tell them that maybe you need to do this, you need to do this, or this is out of order, or stand up to them in many ways. And for many reasons this occurs, right? But you can see around this that this is an aspect and a problem. I think that there's also some interesting scenes just to talk about Jamie for a minute, he doesn't fit the profile for an incel. I wouldn't even class him as an incel. I think he's just someone who's read a lot of incel stuff, right? As probably a lot of boys who are in their teenage years have, right? Because you're a teenage boy, 13 to 18, whatever, right? It's important to be attractive, right? It's an important thing for them, right? Same with girls, right? It's important to be attractive to the opposite sex. So these boys are wanting to be attractive. They're wanting to be good looking. They want to have status, right? And it's all external to them at this point. You know, at this young age, everything's external. So him feeling that he's ugly, right? Which is something very common for young boys, right? You know, eats away at him, right? He thinks he's lowly, he thinks he's beneath other people and so forth, and that he never have a girlfriend. And you can imagine the bullying that he'd experienced at school now with this word, right, with the singular word as a slur, incel, to mock someone for their lack of sexual, what's the word? Maybe sexual attractiveness and mate value, right? And I use mate value because it's a real thing, but the lack of value, like the bullying could be incessant and cruel from boys and girls alike, right? And this is something that kind of comes out of the series, that he's being bullied by the girl that he murders. I can't remember her name, Katie, right? And that's not excusing what he did because it's not a real life thing, but nonetheless, it's still a factor in what's happening, right? He's being bullied by her and maybe other people as well. So he has this anger, doesn't know how to direct it, doesn't have the tools to be with his emotions, express himself very well. His parents are probably busy, overworked. And I guess I'm moving forward into some of the scenes where he's with the psychologist, and you can see that he really just wants her to like him. He just wants to be liked. He wants to be seen as good, right? He wants to be seen as attractive, right? And you see where he kind of loses his shit, right? In there, one of the things he touched on is the shame his dad feels about him and his lack of sportiness and his lack of kind of physical prowess and his lack of being good at football. And you see that his dad tries to take him there to kind of toughen him up, right? But in fact, it becomes a source of shame because of the way that Jamie's dad actually responds to him when he's not doing very well. Because in the moments when we're not doing very well, in the moments when we're struggling as boys and men, what we need is for someone to stay in connection with us, right? But in those moments when he was struggling on the football pitch, not doing very well, what was his dad doing? Looking away. And when we look away from somebody, we break connection with them, right? We feel an emptiness. And that creates a huge shame that both his father and also he feels about his ability and also his masculinity, right? Because football and masculinity are highly linked, right? And this is a really important aspect because he feels shame about who he is, partly because his father doesn't acknowledge him when he struggles or like is there for him in those moments. And it can be tiny, tiny little moments. And I've got some notes here because I wrote this down. There's something in this, when he's in the prison, there's a prison guard that's helping the psychologist along. And I think one of the things I think is really interesting about this guy is that he's acting unintentionally kind of weird and creepy, right? I don't think he's meaning to be weird and creepy. I think he's probably trying to like flirt with her, right? But he's acting weird and creepy and he doesn't realize it. This is something that as men we do, and we don't know we're doing it because we're trying to flirt or we're trying to be funny or whatever, right? But actually we're being weird and creepy and we're being felt as weird and creepy, right? And actually makes it very uncomfortable as well, right? Again, really important little piece in there. And this conversation between Jamie and the psychologist is very interesting because it's almost like they're kind of bantering for a while, you know? It's almost like he's doing a very kind of primitive way of flirting with her, right? In there, and he's kind of getting this feeling that, you know, she likes me, she's talking to me, so she must like me almost. And then he starts to lie about certain things, right? He talks about the guy who sent the photos around, again, I can't remember, of Katie, right? And then he lies about his sexual experience to her. He tries to raise his status to the psychologist and then kind of admits to the lying, admits to being caught out. Well, she doesn't catch him out. He just kind of admits to the lying, right? Again, it's very standard for men and boys to do because we often look at our masculinity and it's like, how can I boost my masculinity? And that's by being sexually experienced or being attractive. So he's trying to boost himself in those moments with her. And there's a really interesting piece where he starts to be vulnerable about how he feels about his unattractiveness and how he feels about being ugly, and becomes very angry. It's almost like he touches these tender emotions, right? Sadness, right? And other things are underneath that. And his experience is to go into anger because he can't be with those emotions, right? He's never been taught maybe to be sad and cry and be like, God, I feel really shit about this, or explain. He doesn't have the ability at this age, or he's never been taught to be with these kind of more gentle and tender emotions. And you can imagine that, you know, like mirroring his father, for instance, which he is going to do. Young boys mirror their fathers and their caregivers. He kind of very quickly gets into anger, right? And one of the things about anger is often anger is a secondary emotion. There's usually emotions underneath that, right? So it's a very interesting take. I've got a lot of notes about this thing, the back and forth between him and a psychologist, because he wants to know if she likes him, and he's not saying in a fancying way, but he kind of is. You know, he wants to be attracted to her. And when she won't answer that question, he goes to the way of being that he's probably seen in his father and seen in other men, which is dominance, right? He gets angry, throws some stuff, and then he stands over her. He tries to intimidate her, right? To puff himself up, to be bigger, to be seen as good. And these are all examples of how we school young boys into masculinity. Because he hasn't just learnt this by watching Andrew Tate. He's learnt this by the men around him, right? And this is a really important thing. Is like, if you're raising young boys, which I am, right, is who are the men that are going to be around him, including me, right? How am I being? Who are the men that's going to be around them? And if you're a single parent, a single woman raising a young boy, a good question to ask is, who are the men that are going to be around them, right? Because, you know, I see this series, and so much of it, the influence on Jamie is from his parents. And from his father in particular, that's created him to be the way he is. You know, it appears to me, like I said before, it's like he's just touched on some of this incel culture. He hasn't kind of dived really deeply into it. It's just something he's kind of touched on. And there's another thing that he talks about, Jamie does. He says something along the lines of, I can't remember exact words, I've got it written here, is where he says that he could have touched Katie, right? But he didn't, because I don't do things like that, or like, I'm not as bad as those sort of guys. This is a really interesting sentence he uses, and it's not word for word, I can't remember exactly what he said, in that a lot of men say this, like, I did this thing, but there's worse things I could do. It's almost a way to kind of justify bad behavior and make us morally feel okay, right? Oh, I sent pictures around of my ex-girlfriends, but I didn't rape her, or I didn't hurt her, or I didn't beat her. But it's like, as the way to feel better about our behavior, instead of acknowledging that our behavior is bad, is we compare it to something worse, and then our behavior suddenly becomes okay. And that can happen at so many levels, right? Of men and women, but particularly see it in men. We do this justification by looking at worse behavior. So to wrap it up, I know it's a long video, but the thing I really see is like, Jamie has a father wound. He has a wound around discipline, around his confidence, his self-esteem. And these are commonly things that we see in men, I see in men with father wounds, right? Where the father was neglectful or not there or erratic in his behavior, right? This ability to emotionally regulate, I think, is a really important thing we learn from our fathers. We might learn to emote from our mothers. We might learn to feel, but we need to learn how to contain ourselves, boundaries as well, right? And to be with anger and to use that in sensible ways. So it's very clear to me, this series, both you see with Jamie, who lacks confidence, self-esteem, father wound, and also the policeman's son, again, father wound, lack of fathering, not really there, work's more important, really busy. You know, with Jamie's father, it's that he just wanted to grow up and provide for his family, really noble, right? But you see that this culminates unintentionally in these father wounds, these young boys, where they feel there's a lack of healthy masculine guidance in their life, or feeling cared for by the men in their life. And you can see by the boys in there how that impacts those boys, right? And obviously this is a dramatization, but I think it is a really good way to see how fathering and a lack of showing boys how to be with emotions, right? And no way am I expecting the boys to just be like girls, but actually to be with their emotions in ways that are mature, even for their age, right? To be able to have anger and express it and explain it and talk about it, to even grab some pillows and hit them instead of looking to harm other people. But you can see how this anger gets passed down, this neglect gets passed down, right? It's a kind of generational thing. But just to wrap up, it's a great series, really well shot, really great to watch. But for me, it wasn't shocking, right? It's not shocking because of the work that I do. I've been into schools and I spoke to young boys. And like I said, there's so much we can do to support boys and men in this aspect. And I don't think showing adolescence in schools is the answer. I might go into that another time. But the key I see here is like seeking to understand and connecting with young boys to guide them in the emotional aspects of life. Yeah. Like connecting with them. And I know it's hard because we're busy and so forth, but you know, when people ask what to do, this is what needs to be done to support them.